Hi, I'm Amanda McKay. I'm a professional artist and I'm making these videos to give you tips to help enhance your creativity. And today I'm going to talk about using a Venn diagram to help with your creative process. Now, you may not know what a Venn diagram is by name, but you'd recognize one if you saw one. Picture a few different circles, maybe more, and each circle represents some sort of a category. And then wherever these circles overlap, that's where the different categories intersect and where they have something in common. So I'll give you some examples of how you can use this Venn diagram. One question that I get asked a lot by people who are more advanced as artists or crafters who've been doing it for a while, they'll ask me, how can they sell their work without selling out? And what they mean by that is, how can they create something that they think will sell without compromising their artistic vision or selling out? So that's where I tell them to use a Venn diagram. And one circle, well, this would be a very simple Venn diagram with two circles, but one circle represents their authentic creative vision, and another circle would represent what they predict would sell. And if there's some overlap in there, that's what they should concentrate on, because then that's going to still be true to what they actually want to create. It's never a good idea to chase trends, in my opinion, especially if you are trying to eventually sell your work or right away sell your work, because you'll wind up probably being more of a copycat and not have anything unique or original. And being unique or original isn't necessarily the end goal of everything that you make, but if you really are wanting to sell something, it will probably serve you better in the long run to be more unique and memorable. But that's one example of the Venn diagram. For me, with my creative process, I have to do this all the time. I'm predominantly an oil painter, and I paint still lifes of assembled natural objects. So that would be things that I find, like a feather or a seashell, and I combine them into a still life, but it's an allegorical still life that is representing some sort of a concept. For example, child abuse. And I have to figure out how I can show a concept like child maltreatment using things like feathers or shells and not showing any actual children. So I have to find a place where those two different sets intersect and where those circles overlap, one circle being the concept that I'm trying to depict, and then the other circle being the materials that I have to work with. And you can probably guess that often it doesn't work out. Sometimes I have something that I want to paint and I just can't figure out a way to paint it that's going to be true to my artistic vision with using these different natural objects. What I did wind up doing for a painting about child maltreatment that I did, I actually wound up using a mushroom and then a wing from a cicada that I found on the forest floor, where the cicada had already died and the wing was just lying there. And I combined those two and actually did a painting called Hear Their Cries, and the mushroom was red and it did kind of look like an open crying mouth. So I have to think of those two different circles and how I can combine them in order to paint something that I think will be effective. And then there's often a third circle that I have to continue, so that all three circles have to overlap and intersect. And the third circle is, will people be able to recognize what it is that I've painted? Because sometimes people aren't familiar with the different objects I use, and it doesn't matter how realistically I paint them, they may not recognize what they're looking at. And is that something that is going to ruin the point of the painting? If I paint something like a feather, or a flower, everybody's seen those, everybody's familiar with those, so I don't have an issue. But what about a fossil seashell that's gray in color and broken, and you can see the spiral structure inside of it? I think a lot of people, I've had to be careful using those and either use them in a painting where it doesn't matter as much if people don't know what they're looking at, or position it in a way that they can tell that it's a seashell. If you've collected shells on the beach, you would probably recognize what the fossil shell was. If you hadn't, then you'd probably be wondering, what the heck are you looking at? I did a painting recently using a cactus fruit. And the cactus fruit, I debated whether to use it because it doesn't really look like any fruit, any other kind of fruit that you've seen. It's oblong, but it's a very bright magenta color. So it's not like something that you typically would see at the grocery store. And I wondered, I thought that like a lot of people weren't going to recognize that that was a cactus fruit. But I predicted that they might think that it was a flower. It did kind of look like a flower bud. And I decided that that would still work. So I had to have 3 circles intersecting there to come up with the painting idea that I thought was going to be successful. And I was really happy with the way that came out. So I'll give you another hypothetical example of how you could use a Venn diagram for your creative process. Let's say that you want to write a short story or a novel about a scientist who studies moss, and that's just something that's very important to you and near to your heart. But then you also want that to be an action-adventure story. And I guess I don't know about being that kind of scientist. It seems like it would be a relatively tame profession and not really inspiring a bunch of action and adventure. So that's where you have to consider one circle about the scientist, the person's job, and then another circle representing action-adventure, and how can you overlap it? And most of the time you can find some sort of overlap. So if you approach this knowing that you're probably going to find a solution of some sort, I think that would be very helpful. But in this particular case, there might just need to be some MacGuffin or plot device that just kind of serves as a catalyst or triggers some sort of action. Because if you did manage to turn the story into an action-adventure story, that would be pretty original. You know, something that doesn't really exist out there, and it's not going to be like everything else that everybody's already seen. And I say in almost every video that creativity, just the process of coming up with ideas, is something that requires practice, just like pretty much everything else in life. And if you just practice coming up with ideas, even if you don't even use them, even if the ideas are bad, that is still going to help you out in the long run in becoming a more creative person. And if maybe you're trying to think of how to intersect some circles, I mean, first think of, well, what circles, what different categories would you want to overlap? And then can you overlap them? And maybe you can't figure out a way that you can do that, or maybe you do, but you don't like the way that it overlaps. Just thinking about it as a creative exercise, whether or not you do anything with it, is going to be very helpful for you to become more creative in the long run. So give the Venn diagram a try, and have you ever used this before in something creative? Let me know in the comments what you think and whether or not you find this tip to be useful. And I hope you liked this video. Again, my name is Amanda McKay, and thank you so much for watching.